Ingrid Newkirk, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much for being on today. You, of course, are the founder of People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, or PETA. And I wanted to speak today about a new book that you have coming out, or actually a re-release of a book that you released years ago. Also, I had some ethical questions about PETA and about treatment of animals. But before we get to any of that, I just was hoping you may be able to introduce yourself to folks who may have never heard of you before, or may have heard of PETA, but may not be familiar with yourself. How did you first get involved in animal rights, and why did you found PETA?
Boy, that's a big question. Yes, I'm Ingrid Newkirk, and I founded PETA in 1980. It's been a long road because back then people wanted to wear fur. There were none of these vegan options in the supermarkets like plant milk and the Beyond Burger. And animal experimentation was a hidden industry. Nobody had been inside a lab and brought any photographs out, let alone any animals. And of course, Ringling Brothers was, quote, the greatest show on earth with the elephants standing on their heads. So we've come a long way in 40 years, not nearly far enough. But I discovered animal rights in a weird way. I was working in Washington, D.C., and I had reformed the animal shelter, which used to be called the dog pound. And it was an awful mess. It was filthy. The animals didn't get veterinary care. And I had gone in, I'd been appointed what they called then the pound master, and I had cleaned the place up. And the Washingtonian magazine awarded me Washingtonian of the Year that year. And I just happened to pick up a copy of Peter Singer's book, groundbreaking book, called Animal Liberation. And when I read it, I suddenly thought, hang on, I don't only believe that we shouldn't kick the dog and we shouldn't, put a firecracker on a cat's tail or starve a horse. I actually believe what he's saying is that they are other nations just like ours. They think and they feel. If you burn them with a cigarette, they feel the same we do. They get lonely, they fall in love. And why are we treating them with such bias, such prejudice? So why are we exploiting them? And so when I went to get my award, instead of standing up in front of the dinner crowd and saying, thank you for this and for helping me clean up the dog pound, I said, maybe we shouldn't be eating animals. Maybe we shouldn't be wearing them. And that was my introduction to animal rights.
So you recently re-released the book Free the Animals, which I see you have behind you there. Could you go over the story of what that book is about and why you are re-releasing it today?
Yes, the publisher wanted it released and updated because it first came out 30 years ago. This is its 30th anniversary. And Joaquin Phoenix has got the rights to make it into a movie now, which is very exciting. Chrissy Hind had written a foreword, which is still in the new edition because it's so strong and wonderful. And I wanted to make sure people know that animals are still in the laboratories, that despite what the book is about, which is the old animal liberation front people breaking into these places, bringing out photographs and videos and animals and showing what was going on in the name of science, we still have a problem today with millions of monkeys and rats and dogs and still suffering in all sorts of ways that are almost hard to imagine could be conjured up by anybody, and mostly being paid by the federal government to do these experiments, cut into monkeys' heads or, take away dogs, puppies from them right after birth and give them all sorts of inflictions and infections, and then try vainly to apply those results to the human animal. And it just doesn't work. We're squandering all this money and being terribly cruel. So I thought this is a time, because we do have fabulous technology now. I mean, this is 2022. We've got organs on a chip. You can look at a human heart on a chip. We have high-speed computers that are so sophisticated, you can program them with human data and get results, not spend 3 years force feeding a beagle some chemical. I mean, all the technology is there now, and yet career animal experimenters are still being funded at taxpayer expense, and animals are still suffering.
So what is the story of Free the Animals? Could you walk us through what the basic synopsis is?
Yes, every single story of an animal rescue that's in the book, and there are many, is true. Every detail is a fact. What I had to do, though, because these people are real and the statute of limitations has not run on their entering laboratories and removing
Really?
things.
That's pretty amazing, because again, that would have been over 30 years ago.
Yeah, it's the statute of limitations is different state by state and offense by offense. So if it's a misdemeanor, the statute has run no matter where the offense took place. But in some states, the statute is open if it's a felony. And so what I did from the start, when of course everything was fresh, is I changed the identities of the people who I interviewed and who I came to know. And so I gave them different names and different occupations. But that's all that's fictionalized in the book. And the book tells the story of a woman, a young woman called Valerie in my book, who was a law enforcement officer, a police officer. Her father had been one. It had been her ambition to be one. She became one. And then there was the case of the Silver Spring monkeys, where this is all real. The police, based on investigative material from PETA, went into a laboratory in Silver Spring, Maryland, and found incredible cruelty. Rusted cages with the wires sticking out, injuring the animals, animals with festering wounds that had gone untreated, animals who had not been fed for days at a time, all alone in these tiny cages, which didn't even allow them to stand up. And an experimenter with no medical training had cut open their backs and had severed nerves so that they couldn't properly use their arms. And yet he would electric shock them to force them to feed themselves by picking up raisins from a tray. Not all of them could manage it, no matter how much pain they were in. So the police went in, and with PETA, with a truck, with cages, with a place to put them, removed all the monkeys. But then the entire research community in the United States descended on the police and the prosecutor. NIH came forward to defend this experimenter, a psychologist, and say, oh, well, we have to use this, you know, it's very important science. And it wasn't, it was bunk. And so the prosecutor and the police decided, we don't have any option, you know, all these scientists are here, we have to give the monkeys back. And at that point, a group of people who had never broken the law before, but who had come to know these monkeys as individuals, they knew their names, they knew their temperaments, they knew what they were going through, decided they ain't going back. And so they spirited them away in the night. And one animal control officer who was behind this said to the police officer, Valerie, we need your help. They had seen her watch the monkeys and become close to them. And Valerie said, I'd lose my job. I can't do anything. Don't ask me to do this stuff. And she wrestled with her conscience. And she went home and she talked to her partner. And he said, you've always done the right thing. That's why you're a cop. And that night she decided, I'm going to help them. And so she parked her police cruiser outside the place where the monkeys were being kept, so as to make it look legitimate when they came out of there and were put in the back of a moving van and drove off to Florida. And that was the time when she really decided, I can't allow these things to happen. I've now seen inside, and I don't believe this is right or just. And so she started the Animal Liberation Front in America.
So it's actually great timing to have you on the show, because I recently, actually 7 days ago, decided to become a vegan. So this is now my 8th day of trying to be a vegan. And it's been somewhat challenging, actually, not as hard as I think some people might think. Just kind of avoided hamburgers, basically, Um, but
Well
yeah,
done.
one thing that I kind of personally struggled with, and I was hoping maybe you could shed some light on or help me understand better, is the subject of honey. Because I understand, eggs and milk, like factory farming, how that affects cows and chickens. But as far as bees and honey, for some reason, just instinctively, that seems a little different to me. So I'm just wondering if you kind of share what your take is on honey. Is that abusive to bees, or I mean, they produce honey anyway, right?
Well, yes, it is abusive to bees. And that was a revelation to me too, when I first became a vegetarian and then later a vegan. And I actually heard a wonderful talk by a woman in Pennsylvania who said, "Do you know anything about honey production?" Of course, who does? And so she described it. And there was a book about honey production that she showed me. And what they do is they factory farm bees. And we all know, bees dance, they can find direction, they protect their hive, they create honey to nourish themselves, just as the way they also make propolis as basically an antibiotic for the hive. They're extremely clever and complex, and we really don't know that much about what makes them tick. But she said, when they're ready to get the honey, they smoke the bees out, and many of the bees die. And those who succumb to the smoke and who fall onto the ledge outside the hive are scraped away with a bee brush, which tears off their legs and their wings. And the hive suffers greatly. What they do is then steal the honey so we can use it. And we have other sweeteners we can use, so why do that? But there were many more things that she discussed, like shipping the hives to Florida in the winter, if from northern countries where it's colder, and many of the bees die there. And also now we know that bees need to be left alone because they're disappearing from the face of the earth because of chemicals and human intervention. So I thought, well, I can eat agave, I can put sugar in my coffee, I can do other things. And so for extra credit, you can just skip honey. And a lot of vegans just want to say to people, look, you don't need to take anything from animals in order to live a healthy and good life. So just on principle, we don't do it.
So also in terms of bees, as I understand it, they play a role in pollinating vegetables as well. I believe perhaps avocados. But I recently planted a garden, and my mother advised planting flowers around it so that bees will pollinate them. Is that exploitative of bees as well?
No, that's fine, because they're benefiting from it too. And the fact is that we have raised so many meadows and areas where they used to get their nutrients, their pollen, that it's a benefit to them. No, that's fine. The big problem is chemical pesticides, things like that, which are causing them to get sick and to die and not to reproduce.
Hmm. And then that also got me just wondering about manure. Do you think that manure is exploitative to cows to use that?
Well, the thing is, where are you getting the manure from? And if you're getting it from farming, then it means that the animals are being raised to either be slaughtered almost immediately or slaughtered at a young age, or raised for milk, which is even worse because although people say, oh, well, they don't kill the cow. Yes, they do. There are no retirement homes for dairy cattle.
Right.
They all go down the same slaughter ramp that the so-called beef cow does, only they're older, they're probably sick, they may have pink eye or mastitis. They're not feeling great when they get kicked down the ramp. But in the meantime, they've had their babies taken away every single time they've gone through a pregnancy. Usually they've been artificially inseminated. So the exploitation, I think, is the animals being used that produce the manure that then you use. So it will depend.
Yeah, on the subject of cows, it's funny because just growing up, I hated milk. I despised milk, but it was so funny how my both my parents who were divorced, they would both force milk on me. And I remember even just I remember one time specifically like knocking the milk over on the table, pretending it was an accident just so I didn't have to drink it. And I have to just imagine so many kids are brought up, being told you have to drink your milk, you have to eat your meat to get the protein. What do you think are really the most common misconceptions that people have about nutrition and animal products?
Well, most people haven't a clue about nutrition. And as you say, they grow up being told you must drink your milk, you must eat your meat, or you won't grow big and strong. And of course, all we're doing when we hear that, or when we say that, is parroting the advertising of the dairy and meat industries, because it's not true. And I think one of the most common misconceptions is about dairy, because we're not baby cows, and cow's milk is meant for baby cows who grow very fast, have extremely long legs. They're full of hormones from that milk. Our children, human children, don't need that hormone dose, that massive hormone dose you get in cow's milk. Also, people think, oh, well, where will you get your calcium? People still ask me that today. And I think, oh, Lord, actually, calcium from cow's milk is the least digestible form of calcium you can ingest. And in fact, too much calcium, which was shown by this massive nurses study out of Harvard, will cause you to break bones. The people who drink the most milk have the most broken bones that don't heal well. The best form of calcium, and you do need calcium, comes from green leafy vegetables like kale and spinach and so on. And it's totally digestible. And also from nuts like almonds. Now, those are all great sources of calcium. But what we don't need is cow's milk, and the cows don't need us to take the milk that's meant for their children either.
So one other thing that I wanted to ask you about, and I hope you don't mind me asking, but back in 2004, Penn and Teller, the comedian team, they did an episode of their Showtime show Bullshit about PETA. And they were extremely critical of you and your organization. I'm just wondering overall what your thoughts were on that episode, and if you just had any general response to what they said in that.
Yeah, I think they were cheap, and it was sort of a lure to get people to watch, and they were misinformed. And I really think that they should be ashamed of themselves. The major part of it was this myth of euthanasia being a bad thing. Euthanasia means a humane death. It means a mercy killing. And one of the things that PETA has always done, which you wouldn't find out from them, is we have one shelter. It's an open admission shelter. It's in Norfolk, Virginia. And we will take in animals who are on their last legs, animals who are racked with cancer, animals who have been hit by a car and are crushed to pieces. When people, which more and more over the years we're seeing, don't have the money, the $200, the $300 that a veterinarian will charge to put their animal down. And so they wait and they don't do it. And so we say, it's free. Come to us. You can be in the room and hold your beloved dog or cat as we put them down. And you will know that it went so well that they didn't feel anything. And so we've offered that free service the whole time. And what we're up against, of course, more and more, is that people hear the phrase no kill. And it sounds great. And it could be great in many instances. But that's a perfect world. There are animals who need desperately that final kindness, is to be allowed to escape from pain and from suffering. And no-kill shelters won't give you that. That would ruin their statistics. Sorry to say it in such a callous way, but you can't be no-kill and provide euthanasia services. We've never said we're no-kill. We provide euthanasia services and always have done and always will, no matter what anybody says. But Penn and Teller did a cheap and dirty trick and just sort of said, look at them, they're killing dogs and cats. We adore dogs and cats. I mean, why on earth would we take a healthy animal and do that? We wouldn't, we never would. We do our best, but we take in the dregs, if you will, the ones that have the door slammed shut on them in other places, and the ones who are not going to be relieved of suffering because people just don't have the money.
And just quickly, just a couple other issues that they raised. One was in regards to animal on animal violence. So basically, what they seem to be saying is that if you were to release like every animal from every zoo and pound, there would be, I guess they're saying like it would be unmanageable, and there would be all these animals attacking each other. I guess that also does raise just the general question of in nature, right? Like animals do treat each other unethically. So like what should be sort of a human response to that kind of what we would consider unethical treatment of an animal attacking and killing another animal?
I think their premise, I mean, nobody's going to open the doors and let the giraffes and lions out, are they? So that was kind of just ridiculous. But yes, in nature, some animals kill other animals. That happens. It's funny because you always think we should clean our own house first. It's like not look over and see what lions are doing and say, oh, well, they do it. We should be able to do it. They're also carnivores, and we're not. We're omnivores. We're best suited physiologically to eating plants and fruits and things like that. But yeah, animals do kill other animals. The funny thing is, it's not that funny actually, is that when humans eat meat, they eat vegetarian animals, chickens, pigs, cows. And if you look at what we're doing in factory farming and the manner in which we slaughter, we can't hold our heads up high at all. We are behaving so barbarically. I mean, animals must look over at us and think, good grief, what are you doing? I mean, no animal factory farms to have other animals live in their own muck with parts of their ears and beaks cut off and then turned upside down by their legs and hung up in hooks and have their throats cut while they're still conscious. The human animal does that, and we can do better. I mean, we've got everything in the world that we could possibly wish to eat, every taste. No, we don't need that. And yet we think, oh, well, other animals do that. It was an excuse. And now, either Penn or Teller, I can never tell the two apart. The tall one is now vegan.
That's funny. Well, yeah, just the one last thing from that episode. They also were seemingly pointing out hypocrisy, especially with one individual at PETA, who I believe takes insulin. And generally, their point overall is that the medical testing on animals is beneficial to humans, and that there's a wide variety of treatment for all kinds of different diseases, and that human beings would be dying if not for this medical testing on animals. And again, they pointed to a specific individual at PETA saying basically that she's a hypocrite. So I'm just wondering what your take is on that. Like if it is saving human lives to do this kind of, even if it is cruel, if it's amounting to saving human lives, then isn't it effectively worth it? And like sort of like the trolley scenario with the switch, like it wouldn't be worth it to kind of save humans, even if it's at the expense of animal life.
The funny thing again is they got that wrong too. The person they identified as having needing insulin used human-based insulin, which is more sophisticated and safer than pig-based insulin. She used humulin, but they didn't bother to ask. So they assumed, because they had a preconceived notion, that they wanted to get PETA. And it was just grossly unfair and wrong. This humulin, and that really points up the fact that if you look for an alternative that's better, you're going to find it. And if you don't look, you aren't. I mean, look at AIDS, for example. We marched in the very first marches with a banner saying, we want a treatment for AIDS, or we want to prevent AIDS too, but animal experiments aren't the way to go. And people said, oh, get lost, we have to save lives. Turned out it was true. And we have so many scientific experts, we have so many physicians, so many specialists who back us up, who say, animal experimentation is just an old-fashioned big business. And even back then, which was before we had so many of the alternatives we have now, because people went and looked for them, they used chimpanzees. Hundreds and hundreds of chimpanzees that they kept in small metal cages, in boxes, see-through boxes basically, infected them with HIV, human AIDS, found out that they don't get it. And they suffered for years.
Wow.
In Free the Animals, I talk about a laboratory that used those chimps. And chimps are so intelligent, so social, so feeling. Dr. Jane Goodall said, once we had exposed that lab, which is now called BioQual, that she had never seen anything worse in her life than them kept in these things called isolates, where all they heard for their entire existence, which is decades, in a box in which they couldn't stand up or turn around in, was the hum of the machines bringing air into the isolate. They weren't allowed to be touched. They couldn't go anywhere. They couldn't walk because they were infected with AIDS. The thing is that they didn't provide a cure because they don't get it. They get a thing called simian immunosuppressant disease, which is completely different. So then eventually we got the cocktail that was a treatment for HIV by trying various things on computers, bombarding various things with human blood and finding out what combinations of drugs worked. That's how we got the cocktail, not from animal experiments. So whatever you're doing, blowtorching pigs in burn experiments, when if you'd put the money earlier into developing human skin tissue that you can now ship, you can clone human skin, you can ship it Federal Express to a hospital, you can save over 60% of burn victims. All these things. Diabetes type 2, you can cure with diet. You know, these NIH-funded studies now show you can. But all the money that goes into animal experimentation is squandered to the detriment of human health and to the abject misery and suffering and the killing of millions of animals. So where there's a will, there's a way. And we do have such wonderful, wonderful research tools available to us today. There is no excuse for what's being done to animals in labs.
Well, Ingrid, I have one patron question. Before we get to that, I just had one last question that I wanted to ask about ethics. And so in regards to human beings and animals, is the position of PETA that ethically human life and an animal life are ethically like the same? They have the same value?
Well, I think it's probably easier to understand in thinking about isms. For example, we know that sexism is wrong, and we didn't always. You know, women were told your place is in the kitchen and the bedroom, and otherwise be quiet. And yes, even your husband can rape you if he wishes, and you can't own property, and you can't go to medical school. We used to actually believe that. And then came a time when we realized, hang on a minute, women and men, yeah, there are differences, but they all deserve consideration, respect, and not to be exploited and to have rights. And the same thing is with race and with age and with child labor. We used to have terrible, I mean, you can still find it today in some places, views of people who of another religion, of another country. Their culture didn't make sense to us. We thought they were stupid. We had human slavery, you know, and it was acceptable. It was fine. And people would say, well, black people, black men, you know, don't feel pain the way white men do. And black women don't mind having their children sold away to another plantation because they don't feel motherly love, maternal instinct, the way white mothers do. People believed it. I say today, look at, if you're against exploitation, be against it on principle. If you're against violence that's needless, be against it on principle, against bias, against prejudice. Animals, we're animals too. And we forget that. We somehow think we're gods, and the rest of the living beings on the face of the earth are trash or are put here for us. They're not. They have thoughts, they have feelings, they have interests, they have desires. And as I said, you know, they feel loneliness and pain and joy and love, and they just want to live just as we do. And they just want to be free, just as we do. They don't want to be chained up in a circus, caged in a laboratory. They want to be respected for themselves or just left alone. So in that regard, I think we share a lot in common, and we need to get over ourselves and open our hearts and our minds to who they are. They're not things. They're not a table or a chair. They're a living being just like us, but we don't treat them that way.
So I'm wondering if you could extend the same logic to other forms of life. Like if we're going to say that humans and animals have relatively the same ethical value, shouldn't we also be trying to treat plants in the same way? Maybe even like fungus, maybe even bacteria. Like I'm just wondering, can you extend that logic all the way to all forms of life, or is there something about animals that is inherently different?
I think it's that we don't know enough. And there are people who say mycelium, is an intelligent network fungus under the earth that's communicating with trees for nutrients and water and fires and dangers and so on. And it may be that one day we find out that is true. I don't think we know enough yet. With animals and with plants, of course, we don't know. Some people have done experiments that they put fire near them and the plant recoils, and they may have a different nervous system than us where they do experience pain. Who knows? One could always give them the benefit of the doubt. But with animals, there's no question. We're animals, chimpanzees are animals, mice are animals, foxes are animals, and we all know without any question that we all have nervous systems that are similar, that we all experience pain, and that we all experience fear, and all those sorts of things. The commonalities are absolute. And so there's no question there. Where we go in the future, I don't know.
So as I mentioned, I did have one patron question. So this is from Eric Husso in California. Eric writes, how powerful is the AG lobby who help keep secret the cruelties of factory farming? Do we have the same issues like other fights because of the corrupt corporate duopoly? What can we do?
Well, it's a good question, because big ag, like big farm, meaning pharmaceutical, are very important contributors to members of Congress and to people who are running for public office. It's like the NRA, is that people know in their hearts something has to be done to stop gun violence, whether or not you want to own a gun or not, something has to be done here. But people are afraid to speak up because they're afraid that they won't get contributions from the NRA. And the same is true with big ag and big pharma. So our elected representatives watch out not to be too sensible sometimes. Things are changing, and it is vital to get in touch with our representatives, because there is a thing called the Research Modernization Deal that PETA has given to every member of Congress, which shows a clear path on how we can step away from the use of animals, with the most absurd experiments first, the cruelest ones, the ones with obvious alternatives. The same is true in agriculture. We have a Department of Agriculture that is subsidizing the production of pork and beef and milk, dumping dairy products into our schools to poison our children, basically, who will get all the diseases that are associated with high-fat dairy. And yet, we know that animal agriculture is destroying the planet. The United Nations has reported on it. World Health Organization has reported on it. It is destroying us. We cannot have animal-based agriculture. It's not sustainable. Even its use of water, let alone pesticides and the use of land, it's not sustainable. So we need, again, to go to our representatives and tell them to get a backbone, and that we won't vote for them if they are going to continue to kowtow to big ag or big pharma. I mean, that's it. And we show with personal example is that you can live a healthy, wonderful life and teach others to do so by, as you've just done, congratulations, going vegan, not buying things that are exploitive of others, no matter who those others are.
Well, Ingrid, I really do appreciate you being on the show today and talking about your book, Free the Animals, and talking about PETA and all these different ethical issues. For folks out there who would like to follow you and support you and possibly join PETA or support PETA, how can they do that?
Thank you so much. We'd adore to have help from everybody, no matter what you care about. Dogs or cockatoos, we're we're there. It's PETA.org. And of course, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, but PETA.org, masses of information, wonderful cruelty-free shopping lists, free vegetarian, vegan recipes, you name it, it's all there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again. I really do appreciate your time, and hopefully I can have you back again sometime in the future.
Thanks a million.